It's my honor to introduce our next speaker, our next guest, Josh Sawislak. He's the Senior Advisor for Infrastructure Resilience to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. He was appointed by HUD Secretary Sean Donovan in October 2013. In that capacity, he advises the Secretary and senior HUD staff on issues related to resilience efforts for Hurricane Sandy and other disaster recovery efforts. He's also supporting the implementation of the President's Climate Action Plan through the Federal Climate Preparedness and Adaptation Council and the State, Local, Tribal, and Territorial Leaders Task Force. He also leads several infrastructure initiatives for HUD resulting from the recommendations of President Obama's Hurricane Sandy Rebuilding Task Force, which is chaired by Secretary Donovan. He's a member of the American Institute of Certified Planners, has served as a senior government official in response and recovery roles for major disasters, including the H1N1 pandemic, Hurricanes Gustav, Ike, and Rita, as well as the response to the 2009 earthquake and tsunami in American Samoa and the 2010 earthquake in Haiti. In a civic capacity, he serves on the board of directors of evacuteer.org in New Orleans. Mr. Sawislak is a graduate of the George Washington University and also studied infrastructure development at the Harvard Kennedy School. So I want you to welcome Mr. Sawislak.
And thank you, Bill, for the wonderful introduction. And let me thank the association for asking me to speak today. Today I'm going to talk about regional approaches to building resilience in our communities. And it's really a very important topic, especially when we look at how the world is changing. The association has been a great partner with HUD, both on the Sandy Task Force and on following that and with the administration, as we shine a light on the need for action and what we can do about it today. Because as you know, every hour that we delay puts us at more risk. I want you to know that Secretary Donovan and the President appreciate your work, and we know that it is people like you who fight on the front lines of this battle every day, so thank you. Well, it's great to be in the other Washington. I come from Washington, D.C., so this is the more popular Washington, I think. You know, down the road a piece in Olympia, there's a governor who gets it. Jay Inslee's been ringing the bell on these issues for years, and people in this Washington realize how critical climate and resilience has become. It's one of the reasons that President Obama asked Governor Inslee to serve on the task force that was mentioned during the introduction of governors, mayors, county commissioners, and tribal leaders to help us, the federal government, support efforts at the local level, the state and local level, on climate preparedness and resilience. I think it's important for those of us in the less popular Washington to get out of town and spend time talking to people in the rest of the country. Now, this may be fighting words to some of the folks from California and Oregon, even from folks who live in my home state of Virginia. But I think the most interesting wines in America are actually coming out of Eastern Washington. It's not exactly on subject, but I'm following General Honore, so I gotta get something in here that you guys are gonna actually find interesting. The Bordeaux-style blends in Eastern Washington, fabulous. Columbia River Valley, try them. So why is a guy from HUD talking to you about wine? Honestly, because I like wine, but also because about 7 years ago, a friend of mine called me and told me he was gonna start a winery in Virginia and wanted to know if I wanted to be an investor. Now, don't get too impressed, because I own a very, very small piece of a very small winery. But it's a much better line, you know, in a reception or a bar or wherever to say that you're a winery owner as opposed to the guy who is the infrastructure and resilience advisor to the Secretary of HUD. For some reason, I find that that is actually now. But the real reason that this is important is because it's given me a much better appreciation for weather and agriculture. Hey, look, I'm a city boy. I grew up 11 blocks from the Capitol in D.C., and what I knew about farming was from watching Green Acres on TV. And that changed when I got into the wine business. You know, making wine is actually easy to learn and very difficult to master. The first thing that you need are grapes, and growing grapes is all about what the French call terroir, okay? It's the soil in which you grow them. It's the elevation, the slope, the orientation to the sun, the amount of rain, and when it comes. And finally, the temperature both during the day and at night. And even when you get that all figured out, there's hail, frost, pests, disease, all of this can ruin your crop. So the cardinal rule of making wine is that you can make bad wine from good fruit, but you can't make good wine from bad fruit. So no matter what your skill as a winemaker, you got to get that good fruit, and it's dependent on the weather. And ladies and gentlemen, the weather is changing. This is a scary thing when your livelihood is based on hot days, cool nights, no frost, no rain after a certain time. So please try those wines that we mentioned quickly. Don't feel bad about me. I've got a day job. I can come and talk to folks like you. But there are farmers, fishermen, ranchers, even your friendly vintner, who are facing serious challenges. As most of you know, we released the third National Climate Assessment recently. And if you've never had the pleasure of being part of a White House rollout of something, consider yourself lucky. It reminds me of a movie I saw about D-Day, where they had all these moving parts and it was all done in secret. And half the people in DC are trying to leak the story and the other half are trying to keep it until it's ready to go. You know, it's always the worst kept secret, right? We're not going to tell anybody, but everybody already knows. And of course, the International Panel on Climate Change had come out 2 months earlier and told us basically what the issue was, which is we've got a problem and we need to do something about it, but we also need to prepare for the impacts. What I will say about the National Climate Assessment is the folks did an amazing job. And I'm not going to fault anyone for not reading all 1,400 pages of the main text and the appendices, but there is a 148-page summary document and a 14-page highlight document that I think are required reading for this group. It is all available on the web. It is done with graphics. It is regionally based. You can look at what's interesting to you. Globalchange.gov. You got to look at it. And you know, the IPCC report, we didn't get there. It is fabulous science, but it is all text. It is full of very detailed explanations about what's going on. It has a lot of caveats in it, which mean a lot to scientists and researchers. You know, something is very likely. That means a lot to a scientist. Unfortunately, we send that out into the public and folks say, yeah, okay, but you really don't know, do you? Because you just said it was very likely. No, that actually means something. It means it's going to happen. And so we have to do a better job of communicating these facts to people. And I think that the National Climate Assessment goes a long way in doing that. But the people who are going to be able to explain to everybody in America what is happening are folks like you. So you've got the hard work to do here. And it's got to be comprehensible to the average Joe. I think average Joe is right back there. I think I see him. He's wondering, why is this guy talking about wine and grapes and, you know. I don't think you'll all be shocked if I tell you that I've spent my time drinking beer and eating chicken wings. So I am not just a wine snob, especially around playoff time. How about guacamole? Who likes guacamole? See, we got the guacamole crowd here. Okay. Look, earlier this year in their annual report, the Mexican food chain Chipotle warned investors that they anticipate the possible loss of guacamole and some of their salsas in their restaurants due to climate change impacts such as extreme heat and drought in California over the next 25 years. I know. This climate change thing's getting real, right? You can flood my city, you can burn down the forest. You touch my guac and my salsa at your risk, my friend. The bottom line is that we, you and me, are responsible for the situation we're in. We drive too much. We heat and cool our homes with fossil fuels, and we've had our head buried in the sand for too long. Yeah, there are still some scientists out there, who are claiming that this is all natural cycle or that atmospheric carbon levels are due to cow and sheep flatulence in New Zealand. I'm not kidding you. One of the coal lobbyists actually said that to me. I said, okay. And if you want to continue to listen to that, that's fine. I'm going to go with the room full of Nobel laureates. on the other side. Hey, look, maybe Amazon will put hip waders on special for them, so something good will happen. We are in a situation where even if we were able to stop all carbon production today, not the numbers that we released yesterday, not the 30% goal that we're trying for the power plants, not even the last 19 international conferences that we've gone to and committed to numbers, zero. We just flip the switch all over the world, China, India, US, everywhere, zero. We'd still be dealing with the impacts of climate change for decades, because there's 400 parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere. The last time that this happened, it was like 20 million years ago, okay? Let me give you a more relevant scale for that. In 1960, the measure of CO2 was about 300 parts per million. It's gone up 30% in 50 years. So we missed the boat on fixing the problem before it happened. But I want to be absolutely clear with you that I am not saying we should give up on reducing carbon, because we can do it, and sea level rise and ocean acidification will get worse if we don't. But it means we have to start thinking about how we're going to adapt to these changes as laid out in the President's Climate Action Plan. Because this is our future, it's our children's future. We owe it to them and their children to start dealing with it today. So let me briefly touch on what we're going to proposing to do about the carbon, and then I'll talk a little bit more about the adaptation stuff. If you read the paper this morning, if you saw the news over the weekend, EPA is proposing to reduce carbon emissions from power plants by 30% by 2030, 30 by 30. And over the next couple of weeks and months, you're going to hear a whole lot about how this is going to kill jobs, not true, increase electric bills, not true, and that the President is waging a war on coal, not true. The facts are that modernizing power plants creates jobs. These are good high-wage jobs. These are plumbers, electricians, pipe fitters, engineers, and they're jobs that can't be sent overseas. And cutting carbon actually makes the plants more efficient. This is a key piece of actually getting the energy costs down, because right now we're just not very efficient in these plants. And the last piece is interesting because there's been a lot of talk about how this is destroying the coal market. And look, there are a lot of people in the coal business whose livelihoods depend on it, and we need to take care of those people. We need to figure out how to address that. But these regulations are not killing the coal market. Cheap gas is killing the coal market. And you talk to people in the coal business who are not speaking on TV, and that they're going to tell you that. We also heard a lot of these same things in the 90s with our efforts to stop acid rain. We passed the Clean Air Act, and they were wrong about what was going to happen, and they're wrong now. This is a national imperative, and it's about the health of our planet and the health of our citizens. But like I said, cutting carbon's not enough. We've got to prepare for the impacts. What's the line from Game of Thrones? Winter is coming. And sometimes you need a wake-up call to get things moving. So on October 20th, 2012, the call rang pretty loudly across New Jersey, New York City, Long Island, as well as a number of other states along the mid-Atlantic coast. And the voice on the other end of the phone was a late-season hurricane called Sandy. She came a-calling with tropical storm force winds covering an area 1,000 miles across. She pushed a 14-foot wall of water into New York Harbor and across the land from the Jersey shore to the South Shore of Long Island. Technically, it wasn't even a hurricane when it made landfall. But make no mistake, as my grandmother would say, she was no lady. $65 billion in damage and economic loss, 8 million people out of power, and tragically 117 people killed in the US. On the morning after Sandy hit, half of the public transit trips in America were unavailable. Half of the public transit trips in the US unavailable. So the President understood the scope and impact of Sandy, and also that we needed to better prepare for severe weather. And he created a cabinet-level task force to oversee the recovery and make recommendations, and he asked my boss, HUD Secretary Sean Donovan, to chair this, and the Secretary is a native New Yorker. He likes to point out that his wife is actually from New Jersey, so he married up. He gets a good laugh about that in New Jersey. The New Yorkers, Governor Christie thinks that's hilarious. Governor Cuomo, not so much. We asked Congress for $50 billion for Sandy recovery, and one of the things the President wanted to do was ensure that that money was spent effectively, that it was spent quickly, but that it was spent really looking at resilience as well. And so we didn't sleep a whole lot over the next 6 months. We found out that Saturday and Sunday were days you could wear your jeans to work. And we partnered with folks in state and municipal government who it is honestly some of the most dedicated people it has been my honor to work with. We also listened to the Dutch, the British, the Chileans, lots of experts, you know, from Broward County to Barrow, Alaska. We even borrowed a guy from the Dutch, my colleague Henk Ovink. And, you know, what came out of this was a strategy with 69 actionable recommendations. One of those recommendations was the first federal uniform cross-agency standard for floodplain management that incorporated sea level rise. And look, best available data, or BFE +1, it's not the be-all and end-all standard, and we knew it. But we had to balance the speed of getting something done that would actually, you know, have an impact across all of the agencies with what is the right standard. And so what we did is we looked across at what the states were doing, and people were starting to rebuild. And so we said, we got to set this standard. So we set that standard, but we also said, we have to look at this nationally, and we should have better information across agencies. Because one of the things we hear all the time is, look, I talk to one agency and they tell me one thing, and I talk to another agency and they tell me something different. So we've got to work better together. And that work is underway, and I'm hoping that you guys will get a chance to look at that and comment on it later this summer. Another recommendation was an innovative way to get designers and scientists and engineers from across the globe to come up with some really cool ideas. And we did a international design competition. Philanthropy funded the design phase of it. Yesterday, the Secretary, along with the governors of New Jersey and New York, and New York City Mayor de Blasio, announced the winning projects, which will be funded with HUD grants totaling $930 million. We call it Rebuild by Design. It's a new model to develop these projects. It's based on finding the best ideas in the world and adapting them to local communities. We did it in New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, but it'll work in Oklahoma, Iowa, or Hawaii. We need to change the way we think. You know, this is a shift for us to be proactive on climate issues. But it's consistent with how we do other things. I think the President really said it best during his speech at Georgetown University last year when he released the Climate Action Plan. Let me read the quote to you, because I think it really touches on what we need to do. He said, "Americans are not a people who look backwards. We're a people who look forward. We're not a people who fear what the future holds. We shape it. What we need in this fight are citizens who are willing to stand up and speak up and compel us to do what this moment demands." So today, here in this room, full of people who understand what we face, I am asking for your partnership in helping the nation face this challenge head on. We can shape the future. We can do what the moment demands, but it's going to take all of us working together. We must change the way we think about resilience and plan and build for the future, not the past. We must make resilience a given in all of our efforts, not something we think about later. Because let's be honest with each other, later already happened. Thank you very much.